Colleagues, I'm going to ask if we can start our afternoon session, please. Well, thank you so much for coming back this afternoon. We are fueled up after that lovely lunch. Thank you to all those who worked hard to provide it. And it's my privilege to be here this afternoon and take us through the continuation of this conference. My name is Paul Johnston. I am the Chief Executive of Public Health Scotland. You'll be hearing from, and have already heard from, one or two colleagues in Public Health Scotland. If I'd been here 3 months ago, I'd have been here as a Director General in Scottish Government. Good to see some Scottish Government colleagues here. I hope you'd have been giving me some very difficult questions as a Scottish Government representative, and I'm sure we can get into discussion. It's now my privilege to lead Public Health Scotland. Let me just say a little bit about where we're at as an organisation just now, as I hope some context for the discussions and the learning that I am really looking forward to this afternoon. Our board, chaired by Angelina Foster, has agreed a really ambitious strategy for Public Health Scotland over the coming years. At the heart of our role, we want to operate across the dimensions of public health, so we want to continue our work on preventing disease, building on important work done through COVID. If you know the organisation, you'll know we were formed just at the outset of COVID, which was pretty disruptive for us all, and certainly disruptive for Public Health Scotland as a new organisation. As well as disease prevention, we want to work on prolonging life and promoting health and well-being. Those other vital dimensions that I know are close to everyone's heart, because that's why you've come here today. So what is the work that we will do to prolong life and to promote health and well-being? And it's in that context that action on diet, on healthy weight, on physical activity, on sport is clearly so central to our work. And within Public Health Scotland, we're working to ensure an increased focus on the whole range of underlying determinants of health. And indeed, we're working closely with government on how we can see an increased focus on those underlying determinants, with, of course, tackling poverty and tackling inequality at the absolute heart of our approach. So I hope, as well as learning some real specific information this afternoon about the operation of our whole system approach, and being informed by that, we can continually be thinking about how this connects to our broader purpose and mission as we seek to improve health and well-being for all across Scotland. Now, really, when it comes down to it, my key role this afternoon is not to say very much more, but to act as timekeeper. Okay, so we've got a lot of contributors, and my one request to all of the contributors, as well as looking at the audience, is to keep an eagle eye on the large clock in front, okay? And when it gets down to anything approaching 0, could you please just stop? Because otherwise we will be here all day, right? So we must finish at 3:30, and I'm really keen that there are opportunities for us all to ask questions and to engage in dialogue. So without further ado, I'm going to ask our first two contributors to come up, please, while I introduce you. We're going to focus on how Scotland has implemented whole systems approach to diet and healthy weight. We're going to hear from Lorraine Tulloch, who I think will accept to being the brains behind today, the programme lead for Obesity Action Scotland, who has led this organisation, hosting the conference today since its inception in June 2015. And thank you for your work and for having us here today. And also my colleague Yvonne Traynor, a Health Improvement Manager in Diet and Healthy Weight from Public Health Scotland. Yvonne has over 20 years' experience of working in public health in Scotland. But that's enough for me by way of introduction. Do please welcome our guests, and we look forward to hearing from you both.
Thank you very much. That was a very kind welcome, and I can't claim to be the sole brains behind this whole operation today, because Robin is sitting in the front row, who you all know well as our national coordinator, had a significant input to it. So Again, thank you. We're really delighted to have you all here today. Alan will be hosting this event alongside the national partners that have been running the whole system approach in Scotland over the last few years. And to also have so many of the early adopters in the room and the opportunity to be able to showcase some of their work this afternoon. But the job of Yvonne and I is really just to set a bit of the scene around the programme in Scotland, a bit more of the detail and a bit about the evaluation and what we've learned from that. Now, we're not going to be able to cover everything in as much detail as we could. We've got a very short slot and we are going to be kept to time. So we don't have the ability to tell you all of the detail, but hopefully we'll be able to give you a really good flavour of what has gone on. So the programme in Scotland was established in 2019 by the Scottish Government, and it was part of the delivery plan that you heard about earlier and their ambition to halve childhood obesity. And the national partners in the programme are shown here. It was Scottish Government, Public Health Scotland, Food Standards Scotland and Obesity Action Scotland. And even before the early adopters were identified as partners, we were all together planning and shaping the programme and thinking about what it was involved. The programme was led by Scottish Government and it was originally embedded within the Public Health Reform team in Scottish Government. However, COVID led to a bit of disruption in the structures and staffing of Scottish Government, so that has changed over time. But the Scottish Government obviously remain a key leader and partner in this project. The other partners offered everything from expertise, leadership support and alongside even some very practical tools that early adopters could use. And Obesity Action Scotland's role was really to host the post of the National Coordinator as well as all those other responsibilities. And we've had a National Coordinator post in Obesity Action Scotland for the life of the programme. And we've had various people holding that post over the time. So the 8 local authorities were selected as early adopters of the whole system approach, and they're shown here on the map. Those eagle-eyed amongst you will note that Aberdeenshire, who you are going to go on and hear from, are not on that map. And that's because they were actually able to progress their work despite not being an official early adopter, but they were definitely early to adopt the process. And that was really great to be able to then connect with them later on in the process and see how they had progressed theirs in a process that was slightly different and that when they weren't part of the kind of formal mechanism at the beginning of the process and the formal support system. So, but we have been delighted that they've been very well connected over the last 6 months to a year in the programme. So when we set out all the early adopters, we were invited to nominate a project lead and a project sponsor from both the health board and the local authority area. And those were the kind of lead people that would take things forward. Those early adopters were then provided with some training. The training focused on the Leeds Beckett guidance at the beginning and the model and the work that had been undertaken through Public Health England and what we had learned from that. And although that training was provided, the early adopters were very much encouraged to see that as guidance rather than a prescriptive method to be used, and they were free to adapt that and decide how they wanted to apply it. And I think what we also need to know is that, sorry, there's a few other things should come up on this slide. The other thing we need to know is that in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to change quite a bit of how things were developing. You've heard earlier about the kind of process of workshops, and you'll hear more about that from our early adopters, and they all had to move online. So at a point in the timeline, we introduced some training from the Democratic Society, who started to give us tools and techniques to be able to operate online and continue with the programme that way. So this just gives you a bit of a flavour for that structure, and it shows you how the programme operated and the players within it. And sitting at the top, the national partners, and then to really demonstrate that the national coordinator post was that real link and interface between those two levels. They were there to be the support for the early adopters, but also to be the conduit to provide information back up to the national partners or to bring things from the national partners down to the early adopters. And the tasks associated with that that national coordinator role changed over time as well. And it was everything from arranging training, running Skillshare meetings, managing online K-hubs of documentation, and even helping out at local workshops, and most recently reviewing some of the actions that early adopters have done. And the national coordinator was really there also to provide that one-to-one support to individual areas when they needed it. The evaluation is obviously a key element, and Yvonne is going to cover that in a few moments, but you'll see at the bottom of that diagram some of the evaluations that were undertaken as part of this programme. The SMG, the main one that Yvonne will talk about, and then the first ones that you've already heard about, the links that some of the local areas have made to get evaluation built in at that stage as well. Now, I know this is a very busy diagram to read, but what I wanted to highlight from that is the timeline of activities between 2019 and 21. And you can get a copy of this diagram within a report that is now available on our website. And it's just to really highlight the activity and point you to a few areas that things were going on in those 2 years, and the resource that was put into this programme. If you look down the side, you'll see things highlighted like the national partners meetings, and then the number of orange markers along the line of that shows you how many meetings we held of those. And then some of the key parts are around the early adopter milestones, the times where training was held, where workshops were held. They're all detailed on this timeline as well, which I really think gives you a good feel for the volume of activity, the volume of training provision when it happened, and how the kind of national coordinator worked to overview and connect all those parts of the process. So in amongst all the other evaluations that you've heard about, Obesity Action Scotland, we decided to take a bit of an internal evaluation just to reflect and assess on our own role within this programme and the work that we did in it, and to really take some time out to look at that. So we conducted an ethnographic action research. It focuses only on the work that we were doing as an organisation, but it allowed us to really immerse ourselves in the documentation, the email exchanges, the feedback and the interactions that had occurred during the programme. And we hope it will really assist and strengthen and add to the other evaluations that are available and as the programme progresses, or as we take things forward in the future. And what we were trying to do with our evaluation was to just look a bit at the successes and the challenges and inform future work. And we analysed that in 4 areas. We looked at the challenges, the strengths, the weaknesses and the opportunities presented by the OAS participation in the programme. Challenges, they stem predominantly from the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdowns, things that we couldn't have seen, and they forced us to change our ways. Strengths, well, these are reflecting a lot of the themes you've already heard earlier today. It's the things around collaborative leadership. It's about connecting people, communication and knowledge management were pretty important here. A weakness often will come up, and I think we'll hear it as well as a theme. Resourcing still is an issue, obviously. Annual renewal of funding, making sure there's enough staff. There was a lot of areas to cover. It's an area that we need to think about. But significant opportunities, and again, what has been interesting to listen to this morning is a lot of these are reflected in what we've heard this morning, how important terminology is, how important it is to be consistent in terminology, really understanding the challenge and working with lots of other sectors as we adopt the system approach. So that's me covered all of what I'm going to say for the moment. I'm going to hand over to Yvonne, who's going to talk us through the evaluation, and then I might say a few words at the end about the most recent phase. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I'm really here to talk about the evaluation, the national evaluation of the whole systems approach. But I've had the pleasure of being involved with this work since 2019, almost from the very start, not quite as long as Lorraine. I've had the opportunity to support several of the early adopter areas, facilitate their whole systems approach workshops. And they were fantastic events to be part of, provided me with a real appreciation of the enormity of testing out this type of approach. Also, with being comfortable with complexity, uncomfortable, maybe I was a wee slide there, and dare I say the messiness of it all, and at times it did feel quite overwhelming and messy, and I'm sure it still does. But the evaluation programme has really identified the evaluation. Sorry, I'll start that again. The evaluation was identified as an early priority. And as our colleague said today, Scottish Government funded that, but Public Health Scotland led on it, and we had all of the other national partners sit on the Evaluation Advisory Group. And the purpose, it was really decided that we would need a process evaluation to really understand more about implementing the whole systems approach. This was quite novel for Scotland at the time, and we wanted it to provide learning for the early adopters themselves, but also wider learning about the implementation, which could be beneficial in refining the approach for diet and healthy weight, but also in other areas of public health. And the objectives of the evaluation were to understand how it worked in each of the areas and capture any differences. Capture what it looked like in practice through the lens of the 9 core characteristics of whole systems approaches, and they were defined, as Lorraine said, by Public Health Reform, who were involved right at the very start, and to look at what they looked like at the beginning and the end of the process. And I know that this is an ongoing process, but the end of this programme of work, to assess whether and to what extent the whole systems approach contributed to the short-term outcomes as described in the logic model, and I'll talk a wee bit about that shortly, and explore any barriers and facilitate or support the wider adoption and sustainability of the approach, and to generate support, learning to support delivery. So, as already touched on, there were 9 areas, and our evaluation, which was undertaken by Social Marketing Gateway, so you may well hear it referred to as Social Marketing Gateway evaluation, ran from April 21 and was published in December 2020. And the areas included in the evaluation, and interesting to see the dots are just slightly different from Lorraine's slide, were Dumfries and Galloway, Dundee, East Lothian, Fife, North Ayrshire, Scottish Borders and Aberdeenshire, and it was great to have Aberdeenshire involved for the reasons Lorraine's already set out. West and Midlothian were not included, but they were evaluated by the first team, and you heard from Gavin about some of that earlier on. And I think that as I speak for a few minutes, you'll probably notice some similar themes as well that come up in the last presentations. So a mixed methodology approach was followed for each of the areas, combining desk review, observation of whole systems approaches and the associated meetings, and also interviews of stakeholders, really everybody that was involved in the approach, and also with national partners. And the depth interviews explored what aspects of the process went well, and importantly those that didn't go so well, views on the implementation and the methodology, explored to what extent the stakeholders felt that the key elements of a whole systems approach working had been followed, to look at the noticeable differences and outcomes the approach had made to date, and also lessons to inform future practice. Now, unfortunately, we can't talk about this without mentioning the COVID-19 pandemic, and unsurprisingly, the pandemic and the associated restrictions had a big impact given when the work started, and it did stall progress locally, and also it stalled the evaluation, and we obviously just had to adapt to that, but everybody involved, local authorities, NHS boards, national partners and lots of other stakeholders all had to reprioritise almost overnight, and I think that just had that is like it's just something we have to realise when we're talking about all of this. And whilst there was ongoing uncertainty for many months around redeployment of staff and when they would return and when work like this could be picked back up, and also how the methodology could actually go ahead when it was face-to-face, that fortunately, amongst all this uncertainty, emerged opportunities and innovative solutions. There was new stakeholders identified and services. There was recognition that the approach needed to be better connected across structures and local strategy. And online working, as Lorraine's already touched upon, became a priority. And although many of the local leads were familiar with online working to some degree, I think it's fair to say that planning and facilitating events dealing with this level of complexity was quite new. Training was delivered and this covered a whole host of different things, but how to virtually produce causal maps and action plans was very much needed. It was recognised as well that the pandemic response, which included local systems dealing with complex challenges, had accelerated the interest in whole systems approaches. So a wee bit about what worked well and what the challenges were. In different ways, the early adopter areas positioned their whole systems approaches to connect with local strategies and structures, and the benefits of this were multiple. It provided status to the work, encouraging stakeholder engagement, increased the chance that it would continue in the future. A broad base of stakeholder interest was created and sustained in no small part down to the local leads' hard work and the variety of communication tools and tactics that they used. However, this wasn't without challenge, and continuity of stakeholders has been difficult. As mentioned previously, the impact of the pandemic meant stakeholders had limited capacity and there was some stakeholder fatigue. The Public Health England Leeds Beckett Toolkit provided the early adopters with a logical framework to follow, and the model demanded a common focus from a wide range of partners. It supported development of a shared understanding and vision and enabled more in-depth collaborative analysis than was used to, really. But for some, it felt overly academic and complex. There were some critical reflections, including a lack of community engagement, and that concepts being time-consuming and the process not moving quickly enough. However, there were some areas that stuck quite closely to the process, but others adapted and did so with some success. Many positives were identified on the workshop experience. They were seen as highly collaborative, high energy, well-planned and open and inclusive events. Some light bulb moments drove home the message that a whole system approach is more than good partnership working. It's more about addressing upstream drivers and the determinants of health, and I expect that you'll hear more about this from the colleagues that were delivering this locally. There was some criticism of the workshops that the complexity of activities could feel overwhelming. Other concerns included perception that stakeholder attendance wasn't sufficiently senior to make decisions of the priorities and actions developed, and that the output of the workshop could be dependent on who attended on the day. Capacity of the local leads and other stakeholders to deliver the process was a challenge across the programme, and the time demands associated with preparing for and delivering it were heavy, and particularly for those small number of staff that were leading it. And I've already touched upon the reflections around community engagement. The community view was largely inputted by local practitioners who know their communities well. But it was seen by some, not all, as a limitation to the process to date. So, some positives and a few things to learn from, but I think it's always good to hear what we need to learn about as well. So in terms of the short-term outcomes, I said I would come back to this. So this is our logic model, which is fair to say heavily adapted from the Public Health England logic model to whole systems approaches. And our short-term outcomes might be quite difficult to see, so you'll be able to see it when you get a copy. But all of these, we looked in the evaluation about really what progress the early adopters had made against these. And encouragingly, it was found that progress has been made against all of them to some degree. And it's really, I think that's really great progress, considering that for some of these areas, they were only implementing the approach for quite a short period of time. So a wee bit about recommendations. The evaluation report made 9 recommendations, and the recommendations provided focus and momentum over the past, since it's been published, so over the past 6 months or so. And I've only got time to really touch on a few today. But the first recommendation was around communicating the findings of this evaluation to local and national partners, but also to highlight the potential of transferability across other public health areas and policy agendas. And this has been taken forward by local and national partners, and collectively we've worked to disseminate this through our communication channels and networks, and also delivering presentations at a variety of events, and of course today allows us to build on this further. Another recommendation stated that the Short Life Working Group should be established with strong representatives from the early adopter areas, with a remit to address what the scope and content of a whole systems methodology suited to a Scottish context would look like. So a Short Life Working Group has been established with members from the early adopter areas, and they're assisting in the transition of the early adopter phase to a national rollout with various strands of work, including input into a national guidance tool. It was also recommended that mechanisms should be found to share or ensure that more stakeholder voices and existing evidence are built into the causal mapping and action development phases. And you'll hear shortly from Lindsay around the work that's been taken forward around this to bring together evidence on local levers to support upstream action. So the final recommendation I'll leave you with, as I see I'm very slightly over time, is that what was also in there is that recognising that measuring tangible impacts from a whole system approach will take time, and I think we have to give it time and maybe keep with it. So that's just a flavour of the evaluation. You can find it online, and I would like to give one big last thank you to the early adopter areas for their input into all of this. Oh, sorry. No, we're fine. Thank you. Thank you.
So interesting already, and that clock is quite brutal because it was saying -1 minute, but you did very well in just stopping. So we're now going to go a whistle tour of Scotland. In the next 45 minutes, we'll be going down to Eyemouth and to the borders. We'll be going up to Aberdeenshire and, I suppose, up and across a little bit to Dundee and Tayside. So really looking forward to hearing the application of these approaches locally. And so let me welcome next Fiona Doig, the Head of Health Improvement and the Strategic Lead for the Alcohol and Drugs Partnership in the Borders, and Penny Oliver, Health Improvement Specialist, Communities Team, Public Health in the Borders. Let's welcome our next two speakers. Thank you.
Thanks. I should just explain our first slide. We in-house call it Eyemouth Whole Systems Approach, but people in Eyemouth and ourselves, when we're out and about, we developed the name of the Eyemouth Gateway to Good Health. So that's what we are talking about. And what we're wanting to do is just celebrate and reflect on what we've achieved in Eyemouth and what we might do differently if we did it again. So I shall take you through a bit of context. I'll hand over to Penny to tell you what we actually did, and then we've got a few reflections at the end. So Eyemouth was chosen as an early adopter site, partly because of the fact of existing strong community roots and community development and good partnerships. It's also a relatively small town, and there is also some demographic data about low income and childhood data, which made sense that we could maybe make a difference there with a whole systems approach. Given the strengths within the community, there was agreed to take a community-led approach to Eyemouth, but we made that decision pre-pandemic. And by the time we started the work, the places and the spaces where people met and could engage with us had gone, so we had to think differently. We first got word to do this in May, agreement to do this in September 2020, but it wasn't until after New Year that we really started to make progress by the time we all got back into our day jobs in public health and elsewhere. So the working group had to take a real active role in engaging the community, and they did that through social media, newspaper editorials, word of mouth, but also targeted engagement through colleagues, for example, in the Early Living Centre in Eyemouth. And we also had a very wide stakeholder list, and we contacted them to find out what they were already doing and what they understood about their contribution to whole systems. They were sent a questionnaire, which we then collated and used later on in the process. And we also set up a governance structure where we had the governance group chaired by one of our local authority directors, and that was a safe space for the working group and colleagues to get support and to address any barriers from trying to forward the work. We had a working group that Penny led, and that initially met weekly, went on to fortnightly as the work progressed, and then following the workshops, we identified 3 priority themes and we had a group for each of those, and then eventually we had working groups around each of the activities, which Penny will tell you about. Before we submitted our grant application, Penny and another colleague had the Leeds Beckett training. By the time we started, one of them had moved on, so she was responsible for cascading that learning through the working group and briefing other colleagues in the system. So with that support and support from the regional and national partners on the slide here, we got prepped to do our first workshop. We stayed pretty true to the methodology in the first workshop, but we did a bit of learning, partly due to feedback from folks who came, but also partly just due to our newness with the technology, and we tweaked that as we went. But I'll hand over to Penny to talk you through the work.
Thanks, Diana. Hi, everybody. It is really lovely to be here and to be here face to face after all the virtual sort of workshops and work that we've been doing. Okay, so to develop our areas of focus, we delivered 3 virtual workshops, as Fiona's mentioned, and we all, although we had some of 3 themes identified by the end of that process, the picture really still wasn't entirely clear by that point. So from here we formed smaller local subgroups, and we used our causal maps to do some further work on them. As you can see from this slide, there were a total of 8 actions under 3 priority themes, and these were identified by local people, community groups and partners. And I'm now going to take you through the 8 actions just really briefly before we talk about our learning and reflections. Okay, so this is our first action. This was an iMouth Living publication, and it was progressed really quite quickly following on from the 3rd workshop, and it was led by the local development trustee in iMouth, who were keen to start developing a health and wellbeing publication that could be delivered to all homes in iMouth on a monthly basis. A team of local volunteers were formed, and funds covered software and the initial printing of booklets. The distribution of the booklet was also a really good way for us to keep the town informed of the progress with whole systems approach. And whilst the number of printed copies have now been significantly reduced and the team are developing their digital distribution, the longer term sustainability has always been a consideration, and there were some dilemmas for us to consider when we were working through this. For example, the booklet to be self-sustaining in terms of print costs, advertisement from local businesses would be essential. iMouth's a seaside holiday town with many out-of-home food providers whose primary focus is to support local economy and tourism. So their priority, especially during and after the COVID pandemic, was not necessarily aligned with health and well-being, and so this did present an interesting dilemma for the team. Our second action was book boxes, and they were developed as a way to support family learning with a specific focus on health and well-being, particularly healthy eating and physical activity. So the local librarian and community learning and development service family worker developed this action, and 3 book boxes were placed in venues that were regularly used by local families in the town. So the swimming pool, community centre and early years centre. And all of the books have been donated from various sources, including older library books and books from local charity shops. We know that the books are well used, and the next steps are more focused efforts in specific early years settings. Families are keen to focus on health and well-being, and for the books to be reused by other families to pass them on. So our third action is play spaces. And so just to provide a little bit of background and context to this action, I think it's important to mention that iMouth is in a rural area. It's got limited public transport, and it's situated on the east coast of the Scottish borders. Residents there, I think it's fair to say, talk about a feeling of being disconnected to the rest of the borders due to the geography, and there's a feeling that this impacts on their wider opportunities as a town. Access to good quality green space is a significant area of focus there, with a recent campaign to safeguard a popular area of green space from housing development. And in addition to this, iMouth has earmarked for a new destination play park and skate park, but that won't be until 2025-26. So relatively speaking, not that far away, but for parents with small children now, it does feel like a long time to wait to have a good sort of player area for to use. So first step for this action was to engage with families to gain feedback about local play spaces, and the team that felt that this needed to be done face-to-face, especially following on from the COVID restrictions and all of the virtual work that had happened. There'd been a new development with the appointment of locality-based council community engagement officers, and by working with the officer who covers Eyemouth, we were able to negotiate and initiate small-scale upgrades to existing play spaces. So parents felt engaged with the process and supported by the local early years centre manager, who will now continue to provide a space for parents to feed in ideas and liaise with our local authority. The next action was at the development of a community lunch. And during the workshops, there was a lot of information coming through our causal maps about healthy eating and building knowledge and skills for community food provision. The lunch was set up using a pay-as-you-feel open cafe model that used surplus food donations from the local community larder. And as time presents, that did also present an issue in terms of being able to consistently access fresh fruit and vegetables. The aim of this action was to work collaboratively with local early years group leads to develop a coordinated lunch provision for families. However, we also found that it highlighted a gap in provision for older people who did come in and use that as well. Our fifth action was a visual map, and that project was taken forward by staff and young people in Eyemouth High School who focused on health assets in Eyemouth. The first phase was led by the geography teacher who worked with a group of pupils to map health assets using digital mapping software. Pupils gained knowledge and skills and produced a map that you can see on the slide. The second phase is underway, and another group of pupils will work with a local artist during the school summer holidays to create a clay mosaic map of Eyemouth that will be installed at a site in the town, and that will have QR codes embedded that will direct people to websites that support health and well-being, such as local promises for water refills, walking routes, nature activities, and our parkrun. And our junior parkrun was our next action, and that's a weekly family-focused fun run for 4 to 14-year-olds set up on the playing fields behind Eyemouth Primary School. So the event is held every Saturday throughout the year and consists of a 2-kilometre timed course where children are encouraged to participate in physical activity in the outdoors by walking, jogging or running. We were very fortunate to have a community member with a real passion for parkrun who engaged with the whole systems approach, workshops, and who has now led a group of volunteers that span all age ranges and abilities to work with the National Parkrun Organisation to set this up. The activity is fun for volunteers and participants alike. We've got 4-year-olds who roly-poly around the course, and they're laughing and singing and they're just really enjoying themselves. In addition to the information you can see on the slide, I just wanted to highlight an individual case. So a girl who runs Eyemouth Junior Parkruns completed 34 events. Her time in August 2022 was 17 minutes and 4 seconds, and her time at the most recent junior parkrun in May was 9 minutes and 35 seconds. So that's 17 minutes 4 seconds down to 9 minutes 35. I know she's competed with her school cross-country team now, and junior parkrun, it's not about competition or getting the best time. It's about having fun, and whether the decrease in time was as a result of junior parkrun or not, it's certainly given her the opportunity to practice in her hometown on a weekly basis. Our next action is the cycling. So concerns over cycling ability and cycling safety have been raised in Eyemouth for a number of years now, particularly in relation to children wearing appropriate safety equipment. The landscape can be quite complicated in terms of what training and support equipment can be accessed from both local and national organisations, and we've spent a fair bit of time mapping opportunities across the age ranges. The photo on the slide shows a local volunteer working with the junior road safety officers in Eyemouth Primary School to design their own high visibility vests. School children have engaged well with the process and are now supporting local solutions to local problems. And finally, just the last action is outdoor activities, and nature connections and families being in the outdoors was a theme that came through the causal mapping process at our workshops, and we were fortunate to have involvement from community members and colleagues with the knowledge and skills to develop a programme of training and produce a resource pack to enable staff and volunteers to take families outdoors for simple activities. A number of sessions have been delivered to local children, and the resource pack has been hosted by Outside the Box on their website. We've found that there's a lot of interest outside of Eyemouth, and wider opportunities have been developed by the lead organisation, which is Outside the Box. So I'm just now going to hand you back to Fiona.
So that's a whistle-stop tour of the last 2 years. Last month we had a stakeholder engagement session, a celebration event with people who'd been involved with the project, and Robin came along from OAS, and we looked at what went well, what might we do differently, and probably fair to say the fact that it took us it was no bother at all to fill in the what went well flip charts, a bit harder to fill in the what didn't go so well ones. And what we've presented on the slide is the recommendations and reflections from people in that room that they would give to another area who wanted to take forward a whole systems approach. So it mirrors actually lots of what was said, but we generated this in-house in Eyemouth Community Centre. So make sure you get a hold of the key stakeholders at the early time, make sure you've got the time and resources to make it happen, engage effectively with the people in the community, make sure you understand and know your community. That was felt important in that room that you worked in a small area, so it was a defined size, you could make local connections. The regional funding we got was seen to be really important to kick-start some of the activities and to allow people some time to make plans. We wanted a bit longer work timescale, partly to absorb the methodology, but also, 2 years on, we have done a lot, but as the logic model showed earlier, we're probably not going to change the system in that time, and lots of reflections about the support from the governance structure that certainly made the difference to make things happen. Other things we're thinking about was really, we thought about that action scales models and the level of interventions, and recognising a lot of what we have done is around events and structures. We are thinking we've changed beliefs a little bit. We've now got, as well as if you get a grant from the council, as well as following food hygiene, you should have nutritious food supplied. So that's a shift. I think everybody in the room knows about the sensitivity around talking about children and weight, but also what people think of healthy food. Is it attractive? Can we engage? So we've got a few reflections on what we might do differently too. We took our draft report to that session. People made comments, and we'll soon finalise that and disseminate it. And meantime, carry on sustaining the work after the official programme has ended. That's all really, other than to say thanks to everyone who was involved in the Gateway.
Thank you so much. What a brilliant presentation. Great to hear about that work from Eyemouth on a personal level. Thanks for the big shout out to Park Run as well. Other Park Run fans here? Let's see. Yeah, can we? Oh, come on. Yeah, I live next to Winchborough, a town that's growing rapidly in West Lothian, and it's been brilliant to see the way in which the community is coming together around a new park run there with way over 100 people, obviously in a kind of bigger town. I'm not going to tell you my time. I will tell you my son's now got sub 20 minutes, which he's very, very proud of, which gets us out on a Saturday morning, and we have a brilliant time together. So we've gone to Eyemouth. Let's go to Aberdeenshire now, and a warm welcome to Susan Forbes, Health Improvement Officer at Aberdeen Health and Social Care Partnership. Susan, hand over to you now, please. Susan, thank you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here today, and I'm really pleased to be able to share my experiences of using a whole systems approach to address healthy eating and active living in Aberdeenshire. Okay, just a little bit of background about our work. So the HEAL project has been led by a very small team of us in Aberdeenshire Public Health. So we have really around about 3 people that have been working on this. So myself, Jenny Gordon, shout out to Jenny in the there she is. So we've been developing this work over recent years. We'll show you the timeline in the next slide. We were not part of the Early Adopters programme, as been alluded to earlier. We came across the Early Adopters programme about 4 or 5 months into our own whole systems approach work, became aware of the work, because we were struggling a bit at one point when we were finding our way through some workshops with our HEAL strategic planning group, working online, thinking, how the heck are we going to do this? And thanks to Jenny Gillespie, another colleague, another Jenny in the audience, who helped us from Dundee. So we became aware of the work that was going on through the Early Adopters Programme, and in the recent months have been part of discussions and conversations and meetings, which has been really helpful. So I'd like to think maybe that we've been adopted by the Early Adopters Programme, if that's okay to say. HEAL is one strand of the Aberdeenshire Community Planning Partnership Health and Wellbeing Local Outcome Improvement Plan. Sorry, that's quite a mouthful. But we were very fortunate to be able to put a lot of work in, background work in with the Community Planning Partnership, and to knit ourselves in to have that strategic LOIP. I think that's been really, really important in the work, in giving us some gravitas, really, and having that partnership approach to addressing such an important issue in Aberdeenshire. You'll see there in the map, for those of you who are not from this part of the world, we are in the northeast of Scotland. It's a really large geographical area. There's pockets of deprivation throughout the community, rural and economic deprivation, especially around our coastal towns. So there'll be the associated health inequalities associated with that, especially around unhealthy weight. Our obesity rates are higher than the national average. In 2018, they're at 69% for people who are overweight and obese. And I'm sure that statistic hasn't changed any time. It hasn't changed in the recent years. So apologies for another timeline, a little bit busy there, but I want to highlight really 3 key stages. So we had the pre-planning and consultation phase. That happened before we started our whole systems approach, and that was a really important part of our work, because it was about setting the groundwork, making those, having those discussions, workshops with our community planning partnerships, to let them have that understanding. And the wider determinants of health were really, really important in addressing unhealthy weight. And a lot of people really got that. So our workshops were really important. And we had meetings and we had reports to and froing. Sadly, as we all experienced the COVID pandemic, and that really delayed things by quite a long time, a good few, many months. So 2019 was when we started, the tail end of 2019. And then we had the pandemic. So February, we got back on track, and of 2021, and we had buy-in from the Community Planning Partnership Exec that this was to be one strand of the health and wellbeing LOIP. So that was terrific, super. But then the hard work really began. So we hunted around for an approach that would be good to use, you know, an approach that you work with partners to address a complex issue. And hello, here was the Public Health England whole systems approach guidance that we came across. So we used that approach, and that's what we did over a good period of time. Well, we're still working on it now. But what happens, we used our community planning partnership already sort of set up framework, and we're quite easily managed to pull together a HEAL strategic partnership group. And they are the group that have been progressing this work over the recent couple of years now. So this group involve people from Aberdeenshire Council services, so relevant services such as planning, we have environmental health, leisure, education, and we have other groups such as organisations such as the Cairngorm National Park, we have Health and Social Care Partnership, Aberdeen University, the list goes on. So we have really good representation. So what we did was that we then started to work through those phases, the sort of phases that the whole systems approach guidance takes you along. So we were building a picture of what was already happening in Aberdeenshire around healthy weight or unhealthy weight. We were building a picture around, went through the steps of understanding what actions were already happening, what needs to happen. We were working through workshops around the causal maps, mapping out what was it that needed to happen in order to address this issue. But what we did differently, which really kind of set us apart from the community, from the the guidance, the whole systems approach guidance, was that we invested a full year's worth of work into community engagement. So what we did was that we commissioned a community learning and development officer who was really experienced in community engagement, and commissioned him for a full year, 3 days a week, to work with communities to understand what are the assets, what are the barriers, and what actions do they think would work for them. And this approach happened over 3 phases. So we had phase 1 was about speaking to people on the street, having pop-up stalls. And then we worked with more focused groups, those vulnerable groups who were vulnerable to health inequality. So we had looked after children, we had elderly groups, we had people who were families who were suffering from financial issues. So a lot of work was done around that, and then finally, at the end of that community engagement, we had what we called a mini public, where we pulled everybody together, people from the communities, with some of our stakeholders, to look at our action plan, which had been developed at that stage, to say, right, what do you think? And it was sense checked. And this is when we had to have a really hard skin, because there was a few things that were said at that meeting, and we had to go back and revisit and review our plan. But really what happened was that while the strategic planning group were working through the whole systems approach action, the stages where you're developing your actions, looking at the evidence and so on, we were checking in with the community engagement work and sort of checking in along the way. So what was coming back from the communities, we were integrating that into our action plan as we're moving on. So that was really important. So we felt that that's a real strength, and we really felt that that was, we had that community informing our work as we went along. So that was really key. So what happened after that? In October last year, we had developed an action plan. So we had 35 HEAL actions across 5 key themes. Community engagement, because it came across really loud and clear that we needed to continue that work with our communities going forward. Physical activity, food accessibility, education, self-management, and mental health and well-being. So many of those actions in the plan, I'm not going to tease out, I'm not going to show you any examples of actions, because you can look at a link at that. There's a link at the end of my slides that will show you all that, so you can read that at your leisure. But I would say that many of the actions had actions that were relevant around accessibility and affordability. So that sort of health inequalities aspect is very much seen in that plan. Also, we have some upstream actions as well, so addressing those wider determinants of health. So we have actions around improving infrastructure to improve active travel. We have some actions there about food accessibility or healthy food accessibility. For example, working with retailers about lowering salt content, environmental health, working with these retail industries. So there's a few things in there that we think have, would hope to make a difference. So our learning points, so some successes and challenges. So our successes, I would say, have been using the community planning partnership structure. The LOIP was a high-profile strategic plan. Partners need to be progressing that plan, so I think we're really fortunate to have it as a LOIP. And it's a long-term plan. I would like to think maybe a 21-year-old plan would be a good way forward, but it's a 10-year plan. But as you know, it's a complex issue addressing unhealthy weight, and it's not going to sort itself overnight. So a long-term plan is great. So this is a 10-year plan. Aspects of the Public Health England whole systems approach framework worked really well. So some of the exercises that we carried out were really good and really beneficial for our partners. They really understood them. So, for example, there was a session around the determinants of health model, which you can see in there slightly. It's like a rainbow model, and people were able to see that the causes of unhealthy weight sit at those wider determinants, and people really got that. They really understood that it needs to be upstream actions that need to happen to make a difference. So that was really important, and people really got that. Even my husband got it, he saw that. He looked over my shoulder one day and said, "Oh, what's this?" And I told him, he's like, "Oh, wow, I really get that, actually." And I thought, well, if he gets it. So anyway, community engagement is it's been really, really good. I've been talking about that earlier. That was the real strength in our work, co-developing actions with communities and the Heal Strategic Planning Group. Working online during the pandemic, I wasn't sure if that was going to be a challenge because it was challenging. But generally speaking, for Aberdeenshire, we're able to access our Heal Strategic Planning Group really easily. We had really good attendance at our online meetings, so that was a benefit. Challenges, systems leadership. It's been mentioned before today about having the right people around the table, the right senior level influence, those decision makers, because if they're not around the table, they're not going to be able to be absolutely sure that that action is going to happen within your plan. So that's really important. Aspects of the Public Health England framework didn't work too well. Again, I heard earlier about complex language. I really found that tricky. Our partners found that tricky at times. Maybe that was down to how I imparted that knowledge to people, but it was really quite a minefield sometimes. I think they became quite overwhelmed. The HEAL remit was very broad from the get-go, so we were including physical activity and health eating and all ages and stages. It's like, whoa, hold on a minute. And we had some concerns about that, but decision was made that we were going to do everything across all ages and stages. And then on reflection, we should have just focused on one age and stage and maybe just, physical activity or health eating, because it's resulted in a really high number of actions. And that's quite hard to manage. And it's been time consuming, but maybe we need that time, actually, in reflection, listening to what we've heard today. But it's taken time and it's been resource intense. And we, definitely need more people around the table to progress this, I think. And it's taken up most of my time for 3 days a week for the last few years. Next steps, progressing the HEAL action plan. So we need to be prioritising our key actions. There's some key actions that aren't happening in our plan. There's lots of actions already happening. The plan, when we developed it, we populated it by what was happening already, to see what was happening already, and lots are happening, which is really good, but there are action gaps. So we need to be focusing on that, and that's sort of our key next steps are doing that. Improving how we collaborate and align our actions. We're quite weak on that. I would put my hands up and say, so there's a lot more work needs to be done about how we better collaborate as partners on actions that are very similar or common actions. And of course, we need to be informed by research. I'm really looking forward to Lindsay's paper coming in the next session, because I think we are absolutely going to be using papers such as Lindsay's to inform the work going forward for the group, because that's got to steer the work. And finally, we're going to be linking in with NHS Grampian's Healthier Future Strategy. There's a group who are taking forward that work for Grampian and using a whole systems approach potentially. So we'll be really looking forward to working with them on that work going forward. Okay, my last slide, as I promised you, I was going to provide you with some links to some more information that you could read at your leisure, some bedtime reading maybe, and my contact details. So thank you very much.
We'll be inviting this session's speakers from across Scotland to come on to the stage in just a few minutes for any questions. So if I'm sure what's been said has sparked lots of questions, do take a note of them if you wish, so you don't forget, because in about 15 minutes we're going to move on to that. Just one connection though that I wanted to mention as Susan was speaking. Public Health Scotland has been speaking to the chief executives in Aberdeen, Aberdeenshire and Moray, who together with the NHS come together in the Grampian Alliance, really to look at how we can work together to ensure that we're absolutely joined at the hip around the data, the evidence and the action. So I'm certainly going to take what I've been learning today into that forum, because I see time and again a theme around leadership attention coming out and how we really get and sustain that attention. So really interesting to hear that theme. Let's move now to Dundee. Unfortunately, Dr. William Cook from NHS Tayside, who was originally going to co-present the session, has had to withdraw because of illness and sends his apologies. But I'm very pleased that Dr. Jenny Gillespie will now present. Jenny is a registered dietitian with over 15 years of experience within the NHS in clinical and public health roles. I'm also very pleased to welcome Dr. Murali Subramaniam, a research associate at Newcastle University. Warm welcome to you both. Let's welcome you to the stage. Thank you.
Thanks very much for the introductions and good afternoon everybody. I am delighted to be here today alongside Murali and I'm presenting on behalf of William Cook, who unfortunately was unable to join us this afternoon. I'm going to be sharing just a snapshot of our experience of implementing and evaluating a whole systems approach to diet and healthy weight in Dundee City. Okay, so with a population of around 150,000, just under that, Dundee is Scotland's 4th largest, but importantly, Scotland's sunniest city. Maybe not today. Glasgow, I think, maybe gets that award. I see the sun breaking out at the moment. Dundee is a beautiful, vibrant and creative city, yet too many of our citizens experience poverty. The map on the right-hand side here shows that of the 8 ward areas that make up our city, 6 of them are classified as areas of deprivation. Many people living within these communities experience health and social inequalities, of which one is obesity. And this is also the case for our youngest children. For this reason, the focus of our whole systems approach to diet and healthy weight was children, young people and families. This focus on children, young people and families was made easier by the fact that at the same time as Dundee was identified as an early adopter area for a whole systems approach, child healthy weight was a key priority for Tayside's Regional Improvement Collaborative Plan for Children, which had a vision for children and young people to be physically, mentally and emotionally healthy. A 2-year engagement and consultation process was triggered to help understand what mattered most to local people related to child healthy weight. Informed by the views of almost 1,400 stakeholders, a local child healthy weight strategy was co-produced, and it's known by the name Helping Tayside's Children and Young People Feel Great and Ready to Learn. Note, there is no mention of weight there. The title came directly from the feedback and suggestions during the consultation process. Shaped by the 5 key ambitions and 13 calls to action, the strategy focuses collective effort and shared responsibility in enabling every child in Tayside to grow up in a community and in an environment that supports them to flourish. Conveniently, the Public Health England 6-phase methodology, which we've already heard about, provides us with a compass and a guide, a set of tools and resources with which to implement and realise these ambitions. To achieve shared responsibility of the issue between a variety of organisations and people across different levels within the system, we found that it was critical to have senior leader support and buy-in from the outset. And I'm going to now play a very short recording from our senior sponsor of our whole systems approach in Dundee. So everybody keep your fingers crossed that this will play.
Hello, my name is Audrey May and I'm the Executive Director of the Children and Family Service in Dundee City Council. I'm also the lead for the Regional Improvement Collaborative in Tayside, and therefore I'm the lead sponsor for our whole system approach to child healthy weight. I'm really sorry that I can't be here with you today, but I'm delighted just to say a few words. First of all, to say a huge thanks to our team across Tayside who are delivering this work, and you're going to hear from them today. I would also like to point out that it's when you hear and listen to what they've got to say, you will see that this is very much a multi-agency partnership approach. And that reminds us all that it's everyone's responsibility to pay attention to this very important agenda. Across our services, we're all about trying to improve outcomes for our children and also addressing the many inequalities that exist. And childhood obesity is one of the ways that we see that there are huge inequalities and disadvantages for some of our children, our young people and our families in our many communities. We want to improve outcomes for our children in terms of achievement, attainment, education outcomes, but we know in order to achieve that and to close the gaps that exist because of disadvantage, and child healthy weight and obesity is very much linked to this, we need to pay attention to our children's health first. We know if our children are going to be ready to access learning and maximise their potential, then we need to put their health and their nutrition front and central. Enjoy your conference. Thank you.
It worked. So as Audrey alluded to, putting children, young people's health first and central is so important. And to help reinforce this message with a wide range of stakeholders, as is required in any whole systems approach, we needed to reach a shared understanding. So guess what I have, everybody? A timeline. Public Health England's 6-phase methodology and process helped us with this shared understanding. So despite this being a very busy slide, it is useful to illustrate our key milestones over the last 2.5 years in our journey. Further details of our process are captured in a website that I will signpost you to later on, so it doesn't matter if you don't quite capture everything here. So let's break this down into bite-sized chunks then. So in summary then, at the top part of our slide here, what we see is the 6 phases of Public Health England's guide, presented here in a linear fashion, but in reality it's iterative and cyclical. The blue line in the middle here is our timeline that shows the key activities that were undertaken from our first workshop on the left-hand side at December 2020, where we all had Christmas jumpers on. It was delivered online. To the right-hand side, where we probably are now in terms of a period of reflection on our journey. So I'm just going to draw your attention to 2 key aspects of this blue line in the middle. So first of all, you see lots of S's here, which are purple S's. This represents students. We benefited greatly from the involvement of 10 students from the universities of Abertay, Dundee, Robert Gordon University and Aberdeen, who were with us on placement or taking their research projects with us within our Department in Public Health. And they were heavily involved in supporting the work and the activities that took place on our journey. You'll also see, further along that slide here, 4 key priority areas: safer, greener streets, community cooking, school lunchtime experience and physical activity in schools. These are 4 key subgroup themes that are listed as the prioritised actions that we had collective agreement from. We recognised that we couldn't do everything. We had to set boundaries within our system. On the very bottom line here, which is green, we can see that this actually represents a period of the external evaluation of our work by NIHR's Public Health Intervention Response Study team. What you'll see here is a successful application to NIHR for funding that allowed us to have that support, and that was so key to the work. Okay, so this slide, I think, offers a sense of what I feel has been one of the most important yet challenging aspects of our whole systems approach. What Public Health England's guide refers to as Phase 5, managing the system network. For us in Dundee, over the last 2 years, this has involved us maintaining and developing 2 stakeholder networks. On the left-hand side here is a smaller group, more directly involved in the work that we do and what we take forward. And they provide the accountability and the governance around some of the work and the key actions that we're involved in. Our group's called Dundee Healthy Weight Partnership, and it's made up of some subgroups who take forward work related to the actions. On the right-hand side of this slide here, you also see a larger network of people. These are those that I would describe as being indirectly involved with our whole systems approach. You can see the range of different sectors and disciplines and organisations that are represented here. The critical difference between the two groups is that the latter may not recognise the role or the contribution or the influence that they have within the healthy weight system. So building strong collaborative relationships and trying to increase capacity of stakeholders within the system has been key. To better understand this, it actually became the focus of our evaluation. And I'm going to pass over to Morali, who's going to talk you through that part of it.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks for the introduction. And I'm glad to be here in this prestigious venue, and it's definitely closer to my heart as well, because I'm a physician by background, though I'm doing public health research at the moment. Coming back to the library and seeing those books, it made me, made me realize what I'm missing, but no regrets. I'm a public health researcher at the moment. So I'm part of NIHR First, the Public Health Intervention Responsive Studies team, and I am placed at NIHR First Fusion team, which is one among the 6 NIHR First teams. So we are a group of academics and researchers across 5 universities: Newcastle, Sheffield, Edinburgh, Glasgow from Scotland, and Queen's University in Belfast. NIHR recognizes that local authorities lack research capacity, and they are unable to evaluate their own public health interventions and programs that they deliver. So what they did was they invested heavily, and we are being funded. So we are fully funded by the NIHR. We are a group of researchers and academics who are ready to evaluate public health interventions by local authorities. So I think that's enough marketing for public health, NIHR. So what we did, availability assessments. So First Fusion team especially, we extensively use availability assessments to co-produce evaluation design that addresses the priorities of local authorities. Availability assessment is actually even recommended by Scottish Government to plan the evaluation of complex interventions, and it comprises a series of workshops with key stakeholders from local authorities and third-party organizations in order to develop a theory of change and then to agree to an evaluation plan. So in Dundee, we conducted 3 availability assessment workshops between Jan and May 2021, and we identified 3 research questions, 3 key questions. So does the approach taken in Dundee support key stakeholders to recognize what they can do in relation to actions at different levels within the system, and how the co-produced activities that's been taken already in Dundee shape this approach, and what adaptations to this approach would be required over time, to connect this to other areas across Tayside and nationally as well. So I should actually emphasize here, the speaker from Amsterdam this morning mentioned that whole systems approach, to bring out results, it takes years together, and we just scratched the surface at Dundee, I would say. And so the First Fusion team, we evaluated only the process, and rather than the success of the whole systems approach, which of course will be down the line in a few years. So we framed an overall research question, and the research question was whether the approach in Dundee support key stakeholders to recognize what they can do in relation to actions at different levels within the system. Now, with that in mind, a quick whistle-stop tour of the evaluation that we did. We broke down the evaluation into 4 work packages. The first work package was a semi-structured interview, and for this interview, we only interviewed the core team, the Healthy Weight Partnership team members, who Jenny just mentioned, and taking the findings from this interview, and also we recruited few members of this Healthy Weight Partnership team, and we gave them some qualitative research training. So they were the peer researchers who again went back to the wider network, and they interviewed people from their wider networks about their role perceptions and their perceptions about whole systems approach. At the end of this work package 2, we conducted an online survey, and this was widely circulated. I know the number is just 27, though we tried to capture more. And this was also modeled on stakeholder-driven community diffusion surveys. At the end of the survey, we conducted 2 action learning sets. One was with the key stakeholders, the Dundee Healthy Weight Partnership, and the other one was with the wider members of the group. So summary of findings. So they recognize that it's just taking shape. Whole systems approach is taking shape, and there's a lot to be done yet. And we found that the stakeholders involved are very passionate, and they have a commitment to make difference to the communities that they serve. And there have been a high level of interest among everyone, but also lower level of engagement, especially in the executive team and higher up. And they found that people are working in silos, and people don't recognize the work that others are doing. And there have been a lot of opportunities that are being missed to work collaboratively. And one strong finding was that people are lacking awareness about the existing structures, and they don't have the knowledge of what whole systems approach is, and they are already part of the whole systems approach as well. So there have been strategies which are not well aligned between key organizations, and especially senior leaders do not recognize them as a key factor for whole systems approach. And time and again, it comes back, insufficient resources, funding and time and manpower for sustaining and scaling up. And they also felt that there is a lack of visibility and opportunities for people from communities to engage within the whole systems approach. I'm going to skip this slide quickly because an advantage of speaking as a last presenter. So these are the pros of whole systems approach, which can be applied to child healthy weight. Like there should be strong leadership, increased capacity, and there can be collaborative working between different teams. The most important part of the presentation, recommendations. So especially for Scottish funders and UK commissioners, such as Public Health Scotland and Obesity Action Scotland, more funding is needed. Yes, and there is a need to link this whole systems approach, and activities across Tayside, and to align priorities and identify additional resources. And for practitioners, it's very important that we identify gaps among the communities so that they can be involved in the work that's happening. And we know that there's lack of awareness, so increase the awareness among the people that you work. On whole systems approach to child healthy weight, and we have to be having clear and positive communication with communities about the activities that are on offer. And we should also facilitate communication and include a diverse group of people. So that brings us then into evaluation, and there is a link for the group, for the website that we have, and the final report's been submitted to NIHR already, and which will be available shortly in the NIHR website as well. So, Jenny. Thanks.
Very aware of time, very aware of time. Just one more minute, please. Thank you. So there are a few tangible next steps for us in Dundee, but I'm just going to, for the last minute, focus on the most promising of which has been how the learning and the insights from Dundee's valuation process were received by senior leaders in our neighbouring local authority in Angus. We now have the necessary leadership and governance to initiate our whole systems approach here, and what I'm going to do is just play literally a minute of worth of a video.
I'm Mark Armstrong, and I'm the Deputy Chief Executive with Angus Council.
And hi, my name is Elaine Cruikshank. I am Child Health Commissioner within NHS Tayside.
And we're just going to give you a sense of how we, in our roles, are going to help lead the child healthy weight work within Angus, building on what's been happening in Dundee.
Great. One of the first things I thought it would be important to mention would be the Tayside context around this. Within my Child Health Commissioner role, I'm part of the Tayside Regional Improvement Collaborative for Children's Services. And within the collaborative, we basically work in partnership to deliver on our Tayside plan for children, young people and families. Two of the health-rooted priorities within that plan are emotional, mental health and wellbeing of our children and young people in Tayside, and also the Child Healthy Weight Strategy. We will take the learning from the Dundee whole systems approach and look to implement it across Tayside, but particularly in Angus.
So hopefully that's given you a kind of sense of just how strong our collaboration is across the whole Tayside area. But in terms of what we're going to work together on the Child Healthy Weight Strategy, within the Angus Community Planning Partnership, we will be integrating it very much with all our work on child poverty, but also connecting it with a whole range of multi-agency pieces of work around place planning, active travel, work we're doing around activity and nutrition within schools and active growing strategies. So we're really looking to embed the healthy weight strategy across a whole range of existing governance and strategic approaches across the Angus Community Planning Partnership.
Thanks very much.
I'm just going to ask our 5 speakers to take a seat now, and we will Thank you very much. Wasn't that great to hear about work that's going on in quite a range of areas within Scotland, to hear about some of the challenges, but also many of the possibilities of that work. So we're going to take a few minutes now, and I'm hoping there are some questions. Who would like to go first with a question for one or more of the panel? Let's get a bit of interaction going now. Yes, right at the front. Could people just say who they are, and then we'll get a question.
Yeah, well, my question is, I'm Lieke from Amsterdam, and my question is, I think it's amazing what you're doing, and I'm really impressed with all the work that you're doing, but I'm curious about sustainability. So are the things that you're doing depending on people or on their function in the system? So are you changing the system, or is it just depending on people? Because what we notice is sometimes you have someone really on your side and then that person leaves, and then...
Great question. So I won't ask you all to comment on, but who wants to pick up that question about sustainability? Is it too dependent on a person, or is it about system change?
From the evaluation point of view, what we found is that we first had to, tackle the key executives, the higher up people. So if we bring about a change in their mindset, and if they are committed to the whole system strategy, we found that it's going to pass down to. So we were interested in finding out, and we of course had some findings that people involved in this whole systems approach activity in Dundee felt that the message has not gone through higher up. So that is a key message that we found out. So that was our point of view from the evaluation.
And I think in order to get the structural changes and the changes in beliefs that we require, it takes a lot of groundwork in building the relationships with the people that we need at all different levels within the organisation, but particularly those at the senior level. So I think it is an important first step to get us to where we want to be.
I think, Susan, you referred to 3 people involved in it. Does it feel quite dependent on those 3 people, or do you feel that there's change that's sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, so to the work that we started, our health and wellbeing lead at the time, Kim Pym, and she was instrumental to kick-starting this work, and there was a lot of energy around it then. And we kept that going, but, you know, she moved on a year ago, and that's affected well, I wouldn't say the momentum. I think we've done a really good job to keep things going. But yeah, just an example like that somebody leaves and you really feel that gap. But yeah, definitely, I think I would agree with what you're saying about having that high-level approach, leadership and buy-in. Elected members, for example, are very key to that as well. So, yeah. Great.
Do you want to just...
Is that working?
Yeah, if it's red, I think just go for it.
Okay, so yeah, well, in IMouth, we deliberately took that community-led approach, and the ideas were generated that way. So I guess to start with, we did work with our people who had that passion in the community, some of whom had been trying for quite some time to get something to take off, and it was whole systems that helped make it happen. Going forward, I think that's almost the governance group job, although that governance group doesn't meet in the same way anymore. Those players within their own systems continuing to exert that influence. So public health, for example, we are committed to continuing the role that Penny has, but in a different way, and that post is within our department, and likewise in some of the key partners. So I think although the regional project bit of it is finished, and yes, community activities reflect the passions of the people that are in the community, but there's a willingness within the internal bits of the system to keep providing that support. So, but it's quite early days, I guess, and we know that what we've done is make an impact to all those people we've engaged with so far, and the biggest challenge is how we collectively sustain that. So I think that's a bit of yes and a bit of no.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Another question here. Yes.
Hi, Sarah O'Brien. I'm over from Ireland just to see what you're doing here and get some hints and tips. But I was just wondering, I suppose, reflecting on my last 2 decades in health promotion in Ireland, at one point we were being challenged about our focus on process and asked to look at outcomes and outputs and be more have more concrete deliverables, whereas the whole systems approach is shifting back a little to thinking about process and how we take that approach. And I'm just wondering, did you experience much, I suppose, resistance or challenge to that with your funders, with the partners that you were bringing on board?
So was it too process focused? Really interesting question, and not getting straight to the outcome. Who would like to pick that one up? Yeah, Susan.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, just go for it.
Yeah, not familiar with these microphones. So we're knitted into the community planning partnership structure. So we're accountable to the community planning executive and the board. So they scrutinise our work. So they have been really impressed by the work that we've been able to proceed over a period of time. But now it's down to, right, what are the, we want to see, outcomes. We want to start seeing evidence of what's working. And I think it's interesting that the discussions had today, we're talking about, it's not about outcomes, it's about, what's happening, but you can't always say that what you're doing is actually having that impact on healthy weight. Say it could be something else like mental health. It's hard to, so it's a bit of a learning curve for our community planning executive partners to kind of get an understanding of that. So yeah, that's lessons to be learned, we're learning as we go along. But I think a session like this and what we're hearing about and feeding that back, to our partners to continue to inform them about, how this is all processing, how this is all progressing. But so it's not just about outcomes, but that's an example of some of the discussions that we're having to have with our community planning exec and our board.
Is there another reflection on that?
Probably my reflection on that is just that having some influence there to try and shift the mindset in that around about it's quite often there's systems in place within our organisations that require us to report back on X number of people who have done something, or numbers focused. So for me, our approach and our processing approach is actually helping us build a bit of a picture and a story to say why it's important to move away from that we maybe need a little bit of that, but we also need something else in different types of measures. So hopefully the whole systems approach is helping maybe shift and change that as well, which I think is important.
Great, thank you very much. We're bang on 3 o'clock, so I'm going to wrap this bit up today. Sorry we don't have longer for questions. Let's offer a final round of applause to our speakers for this session. And I do want to give the time to our 2 final main speakers who I think are going to have so much important material to share with us. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Robin Ireland, the National Coordinator for Whole Systems Approach for Diet and Healthy Weight at Obesity Action Scotland. And I hear from my notes as well that you have recently authored your first book, Robin, on sport sponsorship and public health. I'll mention that. Presumably it's available from Amazon now, and you'll be hoping to increase your sales today. But over to you.
Thanks very much, Paul. Unfortunately, if you look on Amazon, you'll discover it costs 120 quid, but it's one of those academic books. So perhaps we'll have a quick whip round and we can have one between us. But anyway, can I say how much I've really enjoyed today? I personally think it's been absolutely fascinating hearing a whole range of perspectives. Just brilliant. So we've had all the examples internationally and from across the UK, and then we've heard exactly what's been going on in Scotland. And if you don't go away stimulating and want to do more after this, I don't know what else is going to get you going, because it really has been exciting about what's been possible. My role was to, do a lot of things in terms of today, but my specific role in this is to launch a report which is very much about celebrating the work that's been going on in Scotland for the last 4 years. A lot of my slides at the start I don't need to do because Lorraine and Yvonne and others have talked about it, but of course I acknowledge all the work done with the national partners with Obesity Action Scotland. We've deliberately held this to the end, so you can't get it till you go at the end. That's the idea. But this is called innovation practice, not my title, but I think it works quite well because we've already heard from the last presentations the innovation that's taken place and the practice. I'm not going to go through this because I'm not going to take my time on this. You've heard all this before, but I'll just say at the last point here, this report focuses on the actions undertaken, and we have talked a lot about process, and it's incredibly important to hear about process, but I think we also need to hear the stories and see some of the images of the work that's being undertaken, because that's what counts to the people on the ground, the communities, and the politicians and the senior officers that you're working with. They want to see what you're doing. So yes, the process is critical, but so is actually what's happened. I'd like to make my thanks. I mean, I'm the third national coordinator, so I need to acknowledge the work done by my predecessors, and it was nice to hear Gerard talking earlier about Niamh, who'd helped the work starting in Northern Ireland. I absolutely chase people to get copy and photographs for this report, so thank you ever so much for all the people that did that, and I'd like to think it's been worth it. Obviously, I've thanked my colleagues on all the work on this as well, but we've been talking about a celebration of the activities undertaken using a whole systems approach to diet and healthy weight in Scotland, but we should also reflect, and that came across in all the three presentations we've just heard. They talked about what they're doing, they talked about the challenges, they talked about what happens next, and it's incredibly important. You know where the areas are. They've all used the Public Health England Whole Systems Approach Guide in one way or another. That in itself is interesting, and I don't think I probably thought enough in this presentation about a Scottish context. It's worth remembering this guide was produced for local authorities in England, and public health in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales is all delivered by health boards, and that in itself is quite interesting and might give a slightly different perspective. Across the four themes that we grouped in terms of the work done by the early adopter areas, they really can be summed up probably in four ways. And I'm going to go through it fast because I know Paul's going to tell me to look at my clock and we want to finish on time. But basically, improving the food environment, which I would argue is well, we know it's the most important in terms of addressing overweight and obesity. Improving the physical activity environment, system leadership and community engagement have been talked about a lot, and community education. Within the food environment, those were the themes that came up. And we have got a lot of pictures, and I'm quite pleased about that. Some of this work has been talked about. We've talked about some of the issues around accessing food and cost of food and the necessity to support food larders. There's a picture there for North Ayrshire. Susan briefly talked about work in environmental health in terms of changing the amount of sugar and salt in takeaways in Aberdeenshire. And breastfeeding has been an important part of an early start in terms of work in children and healthy weight in Dundee. Physical activity environment, we have got the park run in there, it's got mentioned. We've talked a bit about active travel. That's one of Will Cook's pictures, so I'm very disappointed he's not here today, but he took a lot of trouble going out taking some nice pictures for me. System leadership and community engagement, and system leadership incredibly important. We've talked about that. That top left picture is North Ayrshire when they first undertook the work around whole systems approach. The one on the right, in fact, Penny, you talked about the work that was talking about reflecting on the work that you've been doing in Eyemouth. That's a picture that I took at that session. Community education, that came under all sorts of different headings and different pictures from different places there. So thank you again for everybody who did that. So that's the celebration. That was very quick, and I don't want to understate that because there's some lovely images and some brilliant work. And I'd also say, and I think I'm probably possibly quoting Lee, and if not, probably misquoting Lee, to say everything counts. Everything counts. I don't know what's the most important. None of us do. But it all counts. It all contributes. And I think that's really important. I also saw within the slide, which I thought was interesting, and forgive me if I missed anything earlier, but certainly Aberdeenshire and Dundee, and I know other areas did as well. I know Fife and Borders as well. But in those slides, they use an action mapping tool, which is within the Public Health England Guide. And I think that this is extremely important. And I was fortunate enough to go to the European Association Study of Obesity conference a couple of weeks ago in Dublin and saw James Nobles presenting on exactly the same point in terms of how are we looking at the actions that are being delivered within the programme across the areas we've talked about. So we've used an action mapping tool to look at the actions undertaken in local areas against the wider determinants of health model. And certainly, as was actually said, that if you use this model, it can enable some discussion and reflection on what actions might need to be refined. So we inputted, and I say we, myself and 2 colleagues from Obesity Action Scotland, used the data from 7 of the areas and the actions to input into this model. You'll get all this in the report afterwards, so if you're not able to look at this in detail, but it's complicated. I know I can't move away from the mic, but I'm just sort of looking at it with you, really. This comes from the Public Health England Guide. In that guide, working with different local authorities and experts across, I think it's England, but they found 226 causes of obesity. And they then plotted actions taken against that. Now, we looked at the 165 actions undertaken by the early adopter areas to address diet and healthy weight. And the key point to make there is it's an awful lot harder to focus on the wider conditions and the living and working conditions than it is on individual lifestyle factors and social and community factors. And that reflected itself in that diagram. Now, I would also say that seeing James Noble talk about this in Dublin a couple of weeks ago, we're actually doing a wee bit better in Scotland. We're doing more upstream, but it's very difficult. It's a lot easier to do lower down the rainbow, if you like. That's quite a big point. That's quite a lot of discussion. I think it's something to reflect on. And I'm not going to talk about upstream and downstream. It's also, I can't remember whether Lindsay's going to be talking about it or not, but it's definitely going to be in your report when it comes out, Lindsay. So I won't spend time on that. So just some final reflections, really. And I'm deliberately setting you up, Lindsay, although I know Paul will be introducing you properly. Whole systems approach has clearly galvanised cross-sector working. There's no question about that. It's come up in every single section. It reaches and engages in more parts of the community. But it's worth saying that every single area in Scotland used the Leeds-Beckett model in a different way. Every single one. So if you're trying to follow it through as a very clear 6 days, and Wales you're doing it in 9 days, just to, you've got to look at it very carefully what works best for you if you're going to use that model. And there are other models, as we heard from Gavin before. You have to engage and involve senior system leadership. If that hasn't come through loud and clearly today, it never will. You mentioned when you talked about IMouth, I think, in terms of locality, what size? I don't know. It's a discussion. IMouth has a population of 3,500, give or take, and then was Aberdeenshire something like, I'm looking for Susan, 265,000, something like that. So what size? And what are the resources required? And I don't think we know the answer to that either, because it's people, it's time. But critically, if you get the right people in terms of systems leadership, maybe that isn't cost, that's about beliefs going to the action scale model. Are there gaps in the actions? Well, one thing that doesn't show in that determinants of health model is any mention whatsoever of commercial determinants of health. Now, I'd argue that's a weakness, because commercial factors are incredibly important. And it was interesting going back to Wales, hearing the work that's being done in Cardiff, I believe, and looking at advertising. I don't think that's been going on in Scotland, and I wonder if that's because that's not in the model, and that's such a gimme for Lindsay to come in a minute. So I'll hand you back to the chair and say thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you so much, Robin. Very nice introduction for Professor Lindsay Jacks. So let me just welcome Lindsay, Chair of Global Health and Nutrition at the University of Edinburgh. Lindsay is currently supporting governments around the world in evaluating food system policies and programmes that aim to promote health of people and planet. A very warm welcome this afternoon.
It's great to be here, but I have the worst slot, being the one person that's keeping you from getting home after this really inspiring day. But yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak about this report. I'll just note that the work I'm going to present today is still slightly a work in progress. So the report is not being launched in beautiful form like Robin's report that you'll get today, but it is coming soon. So stay tuned. But what we really aim to do with this report is highlight the local levers for diet and healthy weight. And we considered these local levers to be actions that are available at the local level for not just local authorities, but also health boards, schools, as well as the private and third sector. And these actions are meant to support community health by ensuring everyone can get affordable, healthy food and integrate safe and enjoyable physical activity into their daily lives. So that's how we define the local levers. As Robin promised, upstream determinants, and as also was mentioned in some of the presentations earlier today, the whole systems approach really at the core of that is thinking about these upstream determinants. And this is a really great diagram that really kind of defines that from the Impact on Urban Health Child Obesity project. And when we're thinking about local levers, we really focused on these upstream determinants because we recognize that we really need to transform local food environments to stem the tide of unhealthy food and drink and really put healthy food in reach. This approach also prioritized what in the public health world we call low agency interventions. So these are the types of interventions that make the healthy choice easy. So as we heard from Amsterdam today, it's really about making these healthy choices normal, but also about making them easy. And we were really trying to prioritize those types of interventions. And the reason for that is that those low agency interventions are more likely to meet the twin public health aims of preventing disease and improving health, but also reducing inequalities. So the approach to coming up with this list of local levers, which I'll talk about today, we started out, we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. There have been so many reviews internationally and here in the UK that have summarized what are best practices, what are the most effective interventions for improving diets and preventing obesity. So I really just went to these existing documents and reviewed them and extracted all of the different interventions that exist out there and got a really long list of interventions. And from that long list, I kind of whittled it down to a shorter list, which is the list that I'll talk about today. And to get to that shorter list, the first thing I did is get rid of things that weren't local levers in the Scottish context. So things like taxation or other kind of fiscal policies were eliminated from the list. So got rid of the things that weren't local levers. And then I also eliminated things that were really high agency interventions, because again, we were trying to focus on upstream determinants and things that would make the healthy choice the easy one. After I got to the short list, which was 7 local levers, and I'll present those shortly, I promise, but got to that list of 7 local levers, and then I did a targeted review to try and find evidence that was specific to Scotland or the UK context. And then finally, I took that draft and reached out to stakeholders, many of whom are here today, and I'm so grateful for all of the helpful feedback that was provided. So we refined that list and also the evidence that was presented. And one of the really great things that came out of that stakeholder feedback process was the integration of relevant resources in the Scottish context. So the final report not only has the evidence for the local levers, but also highlights these key resources. So the first local lever was, perhaps not surprisingly, restricting advertising of products high in fat, sugar, or salt by local authorities on things like billboards, bus shelters, public transport, events, etc. I'll actually just note, I forgot to mention that these local levers are not listed in priority order, and that was quite intentional actually, because the whole point of a whole systems approach is you're not going to have one magic lever that you can pull and fix it. Yeah, so we kind of emphasize pulling as many of the levers as you can to really have the greatest impact. So not a priority order. First one, restricting advertising. This lever is probably going to become increasingly important because some modeling studies have shown that actually this type of advertising is going to become more common once the restrictions on TV and online advertising are implemented in 2025. So a modeling study by Kantar actually found that this type of advertising might increase by as much as 26%. So I think it's really important to highlight that this lever could be quite effective. And there's also some evidence from London. Some of you may be aware that Transport for London actually did implement a restriction on this type of advertising in 2019. And they did in fact see that the rate of increase in purchases of these products was lower in London as compared to north of England. So it has been shown to be effective in that context. And one modeling study did actually find that policy in London is thought to have reduced obesity by 95,000 cases. So quite promising evidence from London. The second lever was to improve food environments by using planning and licensing. I've submitted my slides last week, so apologies, this lever is going to change slightly, really to align with the new NPF4, the National Planning Framework, that was published in February this year. And recently, there was additional guidance published for a local development planning guidance that was published to support the implementation of NPF4, which is really exciting. And I think that whilst a lot of the evidence has focused on takeaways, the great thing about NPF4 is that it takes a broader approach to the food environment, moving beyond just takeaways, but to promoting town center first approach and considering clusters of outlets that may affect community health, not just focusing on school exclusion zones, but really thinking much more broadly about the food environment. So we will be working on updating this particular lever, which I hope will be useful for local authorities, considering that NPF4 framework. I'm just looking at the time, I'm going to move a little bit faster. So the third and fourth levers are actually really closely related because they both relate to the out-of-home sector. This first one focuses on public food procurement and provision standards. There's already been a lot of progress in this space. Of course, there's already the healthcare retail standard, the forthcoming Eating Out, Eating Well framework. So the actions that I've listed here, we're really focusing on kind of increasing healthy food, really putting it in the spotlight. So moving beyond just having equal presentation of healthy and unhealthy food, but actually really boosting healthy food and putting it in the spotlight. So those were some of the focus areas here. The fourth local lever was working with local food outlets, but really broadly with the out-of-home sector to reduce calories on the menu. Of course, looking at displaying the calories of menu items, but also working on reformulation and offering smaller portion sizes to kind of reduce calories of purchases. The fifth local lever was focused on improving uptake of school meals. We are really lucky here in Scotland to have gold standard school meal guidelines already. So we know that healthy meals here are, we know that school meals here are healthy. So the emphasis of this local lever is really about getting more and more kids to actually consume those meals in order to improve the healthfulness of their diets. The sixth local lever was easy for us because there's already really great guidance on how to take a whole systems approach for physical activity in Scotland. And so for this local lever on physical activity, we've just referred to this guidance. And the final local lever is on protecting, promoting, and supporting breastfeeding, as well as healthy diets for children up to their 3rd birthday. Again, we referred here to existing guidance on breastfeeding promotion in Scotland. For the diets of younger kids, the focus was really on trying to align with the maternal and infant nutrition framework. There unfortunately aren't many large-scale effective interventions in this space. The focus really kind of in the international literature has been on breastfeeding. So I do think there's a lot of scope for filling that gap in terms of understanding what the best approach is for kind of appropriate feeding of healthy foods in young kids. But we did want to highlight that that is also important alongside breastfeeding promotion. So those are the 7 local levers. But yeah, looking forward to any questions that we might have. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Well, thank you so much. I do hope there'll be an opportunity for questions to be asked either out with the event or before our speakers have to leave. Really great to hear those 7 levers presented in such a clear and a compelling manner. I've taken so much from this afternoon's presentations, colleagues. This morning I was with colleagues from public health bodies throughout the whole of the UK. And one of the things that we were looking at was the projected burden of disease that faces us across all of the UK. The Scottish Burden of Disease study that looks forward over the next 20 years or so is truly horrendous in terms of the anticipated increase in so many of the diseases that we face. The only encouragement, I think, is that much of this is preventable if we can act now to prevent the projected diseases that face us. And of course, I've been struck time and again listening today that it's if we get in now, if we support our children, young people and communities with action in terms of diet, healthy weight and physical activity, that could be such a game changer in terms of altering the projected course of disease across the UK. So from my point of view, it is vital that the work that we've heard today is sustained both at local and national levels. I've taken a key message around the need for both urgency now and for the longer term commitment, recognising that the implementation of the frameworks that have been presented today will take time. I've taken away a key message about the need for senior leadership commitment and committed hands-on experts in our communities working tirelessly to secure change. I've taken away a challenge around the need for time for planning, time for reflection and space for action. And also the need for both expert academic input and direct engagement with our communities. Now, so often it's not either or. I think that's our challenge. Can we sustain action across these areas? I certainly want to say that from a Public Health Scotland perspective, we will work to support this important preventative work as it goes forward. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And our final contribution rightly goes to Dr. Andrew Fraser, the Chair of Obesity Action Scotland. Andrew, thank you so much.
Paul, thank you on so many levels. It is really our fortune, our good fortune to have you amongst us today. I'm not going to repeat or try and justify what has been going on today, just to add to the many key headings that I have heard from Robin summing up, also Jeff Ogles. I'll maybe come back to that in a minute. One thing that really buzzes with me is this issue of creating, building, sustaining momentum, because then it gets interesting and messy and contentious. But we have got to go there after due preparation. I've learned heaps of lessons. I wish you'd had more time on things like the evaluations. Morales just had 2 slides and they went. But I do want to pick up one thing that was said in the margins to me about the importance of people, and it actually was raised in the questions at near the end of the 3rd session. It's about people fundamentally. Yes, top people, but it's also people who lead, who follow, who engage, who participate, who criticise, who evaluate. It's many people, but they need to get it, because if they're into half measures about dealing with healthy weight, we're not going to get it. We're not going to benefit as individuals and as populations. There's a debate to be had about outcomes. What are we trying to achieve? Because there is a tension there, but let it be a debate, and let there be tension, let us surface and resolve that. It's great to be in the same room. And this repeatedly comes up in a couple of meetings I've been in this room. It's just great to be back in the same room, and thank you for coming and participating in the proceedings of the day. I won't go over what Jeff Fogel said, but he said at the end of his piece 5 things. As Paula said, senior leadership that enables change, absolutely vital. The top-down and bottom-up issue, everything matters. If you take a cog out, it doesn't work. It certainly doesn't work so well. This issue about values and beliefs and listening, I took that away very acutely. Causes and common causes, where Healthy Weight positions itself in what councils have to do, what public health strategies have to deliver. And amongst many favourite images, it's Leka's image of the flock, that ability for populations or groups, in the case of her picture, birds, changing their shape and adjusting in the light of changing circumstances. Certainly very thought-provoking. But we haven't yet shifted the dial yet in Scotland. Not yet either in Wales or Northern Ireland. We've got work to do. And the urgency of this work is even greater as we realise that healthy weight isn't for something for today or sometime down the road. We've already lost people in the pandemic, for instance, that we know have been affected by weight issues. So we need to maximise the impact of these approaches that we have been considering and others at every level, and find ways of doing what Lindsay Jacks has just written down. That's vital as augmenting the effort and the impact that we're trying. So creating, sustaining, coordinating change is really what we need to be about. Finally, thanks. Thanks to all the people Robin has already thanked, but also and particularly to Robin and Jen and that fantastic team in the college who've really powered us towards this event and the close of our role in coordinating. And the team up, the college who've been excellent and great throughout. To FSS for their support and participation, to PHS, Paul and many colleagues who are here and not here. To Scottish Government who have powered this and facilitated and inspired the progress with the project. To all our speakers and you, the delegates. Finally, what is Obesity Action Scotland going to do next? Well, this closes our formal role in certain coordination, and we hand on that baton through the Scottish Government. But I'm going to completely misquote what something else that Jeff Ogle said when he was talking about the fire exits this morning. He said, and I quote, "Look for wherever Lorraine Tulloch is running and follow Lorraine." So that's probably what we'll do in Obesity Action Scotland. But not just the fire exits. But it's your time now. Head for the exits. But thank you very, very much indeed for your participation and coming today. And thank you to everybody who's been involved with it, as I say. And safe journey home. Bye-bye.